The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war.
In the summer of 1940, a vast aerial armada is sent by the Nazis to bomb Great Britain into submission.
The Battle of Britain is completely different to all air battles that have happened up to that point in world history.
The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, is many times the size of the British defenders, the Royal Air Force. As British losses mount, the rest of the world looks on in fear.
The future of America and the free world depends on Britain surviving.
So why is it that the British emerge triumphant and not the Nazis? Hundreds of miles apart, four mysterious wrecks are transforming our understanding of the Battle of Britain. Revealing that the real story lies as much in the sea as in the air. This beach on the southeast coast of England is quiet now. But 80 years ago, it echoed to the sound of a life-or-death struggle as gun batteries try to shoot down incoming Nazi warplanes. And British and German pilots duel for control of the skies above. In 1940, the small seaside town of Walton-on-the-Naze is less than 70 miles from German air bases in occupied Europe. Historian Andy Saunders has made a special study of beaches just like this and the many relics of the Battle of Britain left on them. But the holy grail of researchers like him is to find a plane.
In this particular area during the Battle of Britain, there were a number of aircraft that we know crashed hereabouts, either on land, on the mud, just out into the sea.
Andy's come here to try to learn more about one of them. A British fighter he hopes will reveal how close the Nazis came to victory and deepen our understanding of a momentous day. On August 31st, 1940, 39 British fighter planes are shot out of the skies, more than in any other day in the Battle of Britain. And on that day, an eyewitness in Walton-on-the-Naze sees one British fighter hurtling from the skies and powering deep into the soft tidal mud. For over 30 years, it lies hidden, protected from the elements.
When an aircraft impacts the sea, it's pretty much like hitting concrete, and the aircraft will disintegrate. Anything that remains that sinks to the bottom will be badly corroded by salt water, whereas anything that comes down in this sort of terrain onto mud lessens the damage to the aircraft, and it protects it from oxygen and corrosion.
In 1973, it's uncovered and excavated by a team led by local enthusiast Jeff Rayner. But its remains are so fragile, they're now locked away in protective storage in a museum, along with its many secrets. Andy has managed to gain access to just a few of the precious remnants. And they leave him in no doubt about what type of plane he's studying.
What we've got here are very large pieces of wreckage. This is a lower engine cowling panel, and it's got the very typical Hawker engine cowling fastener here. This is a piece of upper wing. The important thing is that it tells us absolutely categorically this is a hurricane.
With a top speed of over 300 miles per hour, the Hurricane is one of the most agile fighter planes of its time. And its hollow metal skeleton is designed to take the sort of direct fire that would cripple other fighters.
They were short range, but that didn't matter because they were built to defend the United Kingdom against enemy air attack. And for that, it was hard to find a better design.
To understand what happened, Andy needs to study what was left of the plane after it plunged into the mud. And now, we can help. Using the extensive archaeological evidence collected during the dig to drain the Essex coastline. As the soft mud retreats from the beach, the shell of one of the most iconic planes ever built emerges once again. As daylight strikes the Hurricane, it's obvious she is badly damaged, and that she entered the mud upside down at a 30-degree angle. Where her rear fuselage used to be is now just an empty space. But using the many detailed photographs taken during the dig, we can reassemble her. And as we turn her the right way up, there's a revelation. She's peppered with cannon fire.
We can see that there are a number of 20mm cannon strikes that have come through from the bottom of the wing and punched out the top of the wing. They've literally come through directly from underneath.
How could one of the RAF's best fighter planes end up ripped open from below? And might her demise help explain why so many other fighters also fall victim on this tragic day? To try to understand what happened, Andy travels to a bunker deep underground, to what was, in 1940, the nerve center of the RAF's fighter command. From this very room, its top commanders modeled and controlled the Battle of Britain 24 hours a day.
There were plotters around the table who would change the counters on the table, and it told the controller which enemy aircraft were coming in, at what height.
By recreating on the map the hundreds of different plane movements on the 31st of August, Andy can begin to get a picture of what may have taken place that day. At 8:15 a.m., reports reach the control room of a huge formation of German bombers heading towards the English coast. Armed with this information, Andy can turn to official RAF battle reports. These reveal that a small squadron of Hurricanes flies out of a base near Walton-on-the-Naze 10 minutes later. As its pilots close in on the Germans, they realize the bombers are being protected by around 50 fighter planes, planes the RAF had come to fear. Almost as fast as the Hurricane, the Messerschmitt 110 lacks the British plane's agility. But two powerful 20mm cannons in its nose cone are a deadly threat to anything that strays in front of it. It can land such a devastating punch that its German nickname is simply the Destroyer. From the records, Andy discovers only one hurricane was shot down that day over Walton on the Naze. It must be our hurricane on the beach. And that gives him a name for its pilot. 24-year-old Jared Maffett, who's been flying hurricanes for less than 2 months. What happened to this young English pilot? And can his fate explain why the British came so close to losing the Battle of Britain? The drained wreckage of the hurricane on the beach reveals it has been torn by cannon fire along its underside. Hidden away in the Royal Air Force's records, Andy Saunders uncovers a blow-by-blow account of its fateful battle. As the hurricanes catapult forward at 300 miles per hour, they find themselves below the German Messerschmitts. The problem that they and many other British pilots face that day is that the Germans have recently adopted a protective tactic. When attacked, they form tight defensive formations that can only be broken up by a highly dangerous head-on attack. Jared Maffett hurtles up towards the target plane.
The whole squadron attacked a formation of about 50 Mi-110s. The pilots broke up the enemy's defensive circles in a series of head-on attacks.
Maffett fires on the German plane for no more than a few seconds, and then must bank to the side. Just enough time for an Mi-110 to catch the British fighter in its sights.
Pilot Officer Maffett turned away from the German aircraft, and as he did so, the aircraft that he was turning away from opened fire.
From the guns in its nose cone, the Messerschmitt launches a spread of 20-millimeter cannon shells that tear into Maffett's undercarriage. If Andy's right, it's this that leaves the unmistakable shredding pattern visible in the drained wreck. Maffett tries to bail out, but from a hurricane, that's never easy.
What you've got to do if you're trying to get out is you've got to invert your plane upside down. You've got to remove your oxygen leads, you've got to remove your Sutton harness, you've got to take out your radio leads, open the canopy and drop out. And if you can't get out quick enough, what happens is you bail out at 400 feet and not at 4,000.
Maffett opens his parachute too close to the ground, and the young Englishman is killed instantly. It's the shifting German tactics and sheer numbers of Luftwaffe fighters that help explain why Maffett and so many other pilots are lost on the 31st of August. But why did the fate of Britain and the entire free world come to depend on this battle in the skies? Strangely, the answer to that may lie deep underwater, many miles from Britain, in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Off the coast of Belgium, a diving team is trying to solve an enduring mystery of World War II. The team is headed by Sven van Helst, who's long been fascinated by the story of a warship that sank somewhere here in 1940. Disappearing under the waves in an astonishing 15 seconds.
When I started as a maritime archaeologist and I found out about this wreck, that there were so many casualties, that was really intriguing for me. It was like, how could this happen so fast and so many people killed?
The ship Sven is looking for plays a vital role in a moment of unprecedented crisis. At the end of May 1940, the eyes of the world are on the beaches of Dunkirk in France, where a struggle for survival becomes one of history's great turning points.
It's Dunkirk that explains why the Battle of Britain is so critical.
The Nazis surround and bombard 1/3 of a million troops, including the cream of the British Army, trapped on the shore.
The British were braced for kind of total defeat. They were looking at the complete destruction of the British Army.
To try to rescue as many soldiers as possible, the Royal Navy sends all the ships it can muster, including one powerful destroyer. The 4-inch guns of HMS Wakeful make her a deadly opponent. She's over 300 feet long and can reach speeds of up to 34 knots. On the evening of the 28th of May, and under intense bombardment, 640 British soldiers managed to climb on board to what they hope is safety. So why, just an hour after leaving France, does she sink in less than a minute, killing almost everyone on board? Sven thinks the Wakeful went down 15 miles from the Belgian port of Ostend, where many vessels have been lost over the centuries. Visibility in these waters is poor, and the divers are constantly being pulled by strong currents. 100 feet down, they see glimpses of what could be a wartime wreck. But there are so many shipwrecks here, it's hard to be certain. And then, a 4-inch Royal Navy gun. They've found HMS Wakeful.
You can see also the remnants of the machinery and stuff like that.
But covered in weed and mud, there's no obvious clue to explain why it sank so quickly. The only way to work out what happened to her, for sure, is to empty the North Sea. As its turbulent and grimy waters are sucked away, an astonishing scene looms into view. The stricken warship's stern bears the marks of a violent assault. And it's clear something truly shocking has happened here. Because her other half is no longer connected at all.
So what we found out now is that the wreck is broken in two large pieces lying perpendicular to each other.
The Wakeful looks as if she's been torn apart by giant hands. What could have caused such devastating damage? The fate of this British destroyer could help explain the origins of the Battle of Britain. But there's one question in particular that's been troubling Sven. Why the wreck of HMS Wakeful is here, off the coast of Belgium, at all? Why would a ship evacuating British troops from Dunkirk sail in the opposite direction from the British coast? Sven turns to official Royal Navy reports and uncovers a little-known fact about Dunkirk. The British rescue ships off the French coast are being so relentlessly attacked that the Royal Navy decides to send the Wakeful on an indirect route to Belgium, where the plan is that she'll then turn west to England.
So we now know why it is here, but we don't know what happened, and we have to find out.
In May 1940, the waters of Belgium should be safe. All the deadly action is now miles away at Dunkirk. The last thing the Germans expect is a ship laden with troops heading this way. Perhaps the Wakeful was the victim of a German air patrol. But returning to her wreck, it's clear that she's been torn apart, sliced in two. That does not suggest a bombing attack. It seems like the destruction that might result from torpedoes. Who or what could have attacked the Wakeful in what were supposed to be safe waters? Sven studies German naval records and discovers that the Wakeful was not hunted down by a submarine, but something else. A German surface vessel that gets dangerously close to the British destroyer during the night. An E-boat. E-boats are small, agile, and fast, but they should be no match for a big destroyer in any head-to-head battle. And if an E-boat was tracking her, then surely the British lookouts would spot her. So what went wrong? Below deck, the 640 soldiers are asleep as Wakeful closes in on the buoy that marks the point where she is to turn and head for England. Just a minute later, she'll explode and sink. But how? The answer to this maritime puzzle has been staring Sven in the face all along. The spot where his team has been diving is marked today by a 15-foot structure, the Quinty Buoy. Sven has discovered that in 1940, there was a similarly sized buoy in the vicinity, with a nightlight that's piercingly bright. Perfect cover for a lurking predator.
It was in the middle of the night, it was pitch black, and the E-boat was hiding.
As the Wakeful gets ready to turn, her crew doesn't know she's been spotted. The blinding light of the buoy masks anything behind it. And it's there, the lone E-boat is waiting, ready to strike. On the bridge of the Wakeful, a lookout spots the wakes of 2 torpedoes in the water, and his captain orders her to change direction. But it's too late. For while the first torpedo misses, The second one heads straight for the destroyer.
Once the torpedo hit, it broke up immediately into two big parts. The water could run in very fast, and the broken parts were sink to the bottom.
Only 27 men from the more than 700 on board managed to survive.
And all the soldiers that were below decks, they had no chance at all.
The Wakeful's brave rescue mission ends in tragedy. On the other routes home, things are even worse. Nearly 200 Allied ships are sunk at Dunkirk, including 25 destroyers. And while in a miracle of logistics and courage, more than 300,000 troops are rescued, all their armaments, tanks, and vehicles lie abandoned in France. Britain is in peril as never before.
The week of the Dunkirk evacuation is the most tumultuous week in British history ever.
So why doesn't Hitler invade while he has a chance? And why does smashing the British Air Force become such a German obsession when Britain is already on her knees? The answer to that may lie over 1,000 miles from Dunkirk, far above the Arctic Circle, in the spectacular and forbidding landscape of Norway, where an epic and little-known battle transforms the course of the entire war. Over 600 miles from the capital Oslo, Narvik has long been an important port. And the waters of its fjord conceal an archaeological secret. A collection of German military shipwrecks from 1940. At least a dozen of them. What happened here, and just how important it was, has been argued about for decades.
This harbor is literally littered with shipwrecks from the Second World War, so I'm really keen on looking into that, what actually happened here.
Archaeologist Frederick Soreide is here to study one wreck in particular. A symbol of pride for Hitler's new navy, the destroyer Erich Giese enters service just months before the outbreak of war. 390 feet long, her giant propellers thrust her forward at 37 knots.
So the Erich Giese was obviously a state-of-the-art German destroyer. So the fact that it now sits in 70 meters in Narvik harbor, it makes me wonder what actually happened to it here.
On April 9th, 1940, the Erich Giese is part of a huge Nazi invasion force sent to conquer Norway. But the very next day, a surprise attack by Britain's Royal Navy sends 6 German ships to the bottom of the fjord.
So the British came in with their destroyers, and they fired torpedoes from the outskirts of the fjord into the harbor. And this was very successful.
The Erich Giese survives that battle unscathed. So why, 3 days later, does she too plummet to the bottom? And how does her demise in Norwegian waters eventually lead Hitler to launch the Battle of Britain? To discover how the Wreckages was sunk, Frederick Soraida's team sends down a remotely operated vehicle.
Okay, good. So we're ready to dive?
Yes, we're ready to dive.
Okay, let's go then.
As it descends through the cold water, the drone's onboard light picks out shapes.
It's very interesting. Look at that. Let's go over and have a look at this then.
Yeah.
This is definitely a warship, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what's the shadow over there?
It looks like another structure.
Is it? That must be another wreck then.
Astonishingly, all of these shattered and haunting wrecks are German warships. Not one, though, is big enough to be the almost 400-foot-long Wreckages. They head farther out into the fjord.
Yep.
The waters here are much deeper.
So how deep are we now?
8.
8 meters.
Oh, it's still some distance to
A
go.
few meters left.
Yeah.
As the ROV descends, the light fades.
There's something coming here.
Finally, on the fjord bed, 200 feet below, something recognizable looms into view.
There we go. That's the propeller.
Yes.
No, it doesn't seem to have taken any damage at all.
They've located the Wreckages,
Yep. Let's just try to move up in this direction.
but they can only see small sections.
It's so big, it's difficult to get a real good bearing.
The only way to see the Giza in her entirety is to use scans gathered by Frederick and other researchers to drain the fjord. As the waters recede, the mighty shell of a state-of-the-art German destroyer is exposed to the cold air for the first time in 8 decades. And it's immediately obvious that she's been damaged by some massive force. A giant crack along her bow suggests she was hit, and hit hard. So much so that she appears to have collapsed onto one side.
We see that this ship has been involved in a big fight, and there is a lot of shell damage.
What happened to one of Hitler's most advanced warships, days after she survived a deadly assault? Frederick heads to the museum in Narvik to research its detailed historical records and uncovers a story that's long been overshadowed by more famous events in 1940. He learns that for 3 days after the Royal Navy's surprise attack, what's left of the German fleet licked their wounds. Then, disaster. The Royal Navy comes back in even greater numbers. 9 destroyers and HMS Warspite, a giant battleship. Using all the latest research, we can now lift up the Wreckages and turn her around. discovering that her guns are at battle stations. It's clear to Frederick. In her final moments, the Erik Giese must have fought back bravely. At around 1 p.m. on the 13th of April, 2 of the British destroyers launch a barrage of torpedoes. The Giese responds instantly, firing her guns and damaging her 2 main attackers, until out of ammunition and completely outgunned, she sits helpless as British shells smash into her hull. The Erik Giese sinks below the fjord's waves, where she rolls onto her side. Her guns now silenced. But all this leaves one final mystery. Why did the Giese remain for 3 days in such a dangerous place? Why didn't her captain take her to safety somewhere else? There is one wreck miles from the Giese that may be the answer.
During the first attack, the British fleet managed to sink the only German fuel tanker in the harbor. So this effectively made the German fleet stranded in Narvik harbor. It is fair to say that the Germans were sitting ducks at this stage.
For 3 days, the Giese's crew hopes another fuel ship will arrive. It never does. They cannot flee, and instead decide to stand and fight. The destruction of the Giese and 9 other German destroyers at Narvik is a much-needed propaganda coup for the embattled British. More importantly, it fatally undermines German naval plans for an invasion of Britain.
The Battle of Narvik crippled the German destroyer force. Half of them were sunk.
Hitler knows that his much-reduced invasion force could be wiped out by the Royal Navy and the RAF before it even reaches land.
It's obvious now that he can't invade, not unless he can obliterate the threat of the RAF planes above the few ships he has left.
It's this British victory in Narvik that explains why Hitler is so determined to destroy the Royal Air Force. But he fails spectacularly. Can the newly discovered wreck of one of his bombers reveal why? On the south coast of England, maritime archaeologist Graham Scott and dive specialist Glenn Skelton are on the hunt for lost planes. Their target lies in one of the strangest features in the English Channel. The Goodwin Sands are 6 miles from the coast of Kent. They stretch just underwater for an astonishing 10 miles. And archaeologists have long been drawn here.
This area has always been known as the ship swallower, and that's because it's an area with very big, mobile sandbanks.
These layers, 50 feet deep, are a danger to shipping. But in 1940, they become a lifesaver for German pilots who can, if they're lucky, skim along the surface and climb out into waist-high water, leaving their planes to slowly disappear into the deep sands.
If they're covered in sand, they're protected and they don't deteriorate. And of course, for archaeologists, that's gold.
The team is here to help shed light on one of the rarest and most extraordinary plane wrecks ever discovered. the only intact example in the world of a legendary German bomber. When the Dornier 17 is developed in the 1930s, she is so long and elegant, she's nicknamed the Flying Pencil. With each plane able to carry 16 bombs, Dorniers leave a path of destruction across Britain. But they have a fatal flaw.
The Dornier is an incredible piece of engineering, but it's slow.
All the Dorniers ever built have disappeared. But in 2013, a team, including Glenn, locate the wreck of a Dornier in the Goodwin Sands.
The first time we had visual on the Dornier, it was amazing, absolutely amazing. This particular aircraft was almost 100% intact.
The team lifts the twisted metal carcass and takes it to a museum for restoration. But how did this fearsome killer crash and yet remain so intact? And might her story help explain how Britain beat Germany in the great battle to control her skies? To answer that question, Graham and Glenn explore the site where she plunged into the water. Using the latest sonar and an ROV to study the interaction of currents and drifting sand. But now that the Dornier has been moved, the only way to see the wreck as she was when she crashed is to put her back in the English Channel. Using the data collected by the team, we can now drain millions of gallons of water and vast quantities of silt and mud. As the misty light above the English Channel illuminates the Goodwin Sands, it reveals a startling sight. The hulk of a deadly bomber lying upside down. The fact that her wingtips are missing and her nose is gone suggests she may have been attacked. But could that be just the effects of impact? Then, telltale clues. Bullet holes in one of her propellers.
I think the most likely explanation is this aircraft is ditched. In other words, it's been damaged and the pilot has tried to make a forced landing on the surface of the water.
Using data from the drained wreck, as well as German Air Force records, Graham discovers that a Dornier was lost near the site of the wreck on a daylight raid on the 26th of August, 1940. And this allows him to piece together the events of that day. At around midday, Dorniers begin to take off from occupied Belgium, just over the English Channel. The RAF quickly scrambles fighters to intercept them. At 11,000 feet, the British pounce. One of the Dorniers is strafed in the attack, hitting a propeller and both engines. Without power, the pilot desperately heads for the Goodwin Sands and glides down to the shallow water. His plane survives intact as it comes to a halt above the sands. How could the British manage to get their fighters into the sky long before they could possibly see the Dorniers?
Britain had invested heavily in the late 1930s in what was by far the finest air defense system in the world. This was a system that nobody else had. The Germans didn't, nobody else did.
And the British then go one further. At the beginning of the war, Britain creates a complete network of radar stations all along its southern coast, each feeding information in real time to fighter command. It's radar that explains how the Dornier ends up crashed on Goodwin Sands, and why even the elite of the German Air Force found the RAF such a tough opponent.
There are 138 RAF airfields in Britain during the Battle of Britain, and only one is knocked out for more than 48 hours in the entire battle. Well, that is a pretty low return when your stated aim is to destroy the RAF.
The Battle of Britain is partly won by Britain's radar-based air defense. But the Royal Navy's overwhelming power also deters a Nazi invasion at the moment of greatest British weakness, allowing the brave young pilots of the Royal Air Force to defend their nation and keep alive the hope that Hitler could yet be beaten.
The Battle of Britain is one of the epic battles of history. This determines the fate of a nation and the fate of the world. And so, the world owes a debt of gratitude to the RAF.
Pearl Harbor is just the beginning. In the terrifying weeks after Japan's surprise attack, more shocking blows fall upon the Allies as a wave of terror spreads across the Pacific, leaving behind a tragic trail of wreckage on the ocean floor. Imagine if we could empty the oceans, letting the water drain away to reveal the secrets on the seafloor. Now we can. Using accurate data and astonishing technology to bring light once again to a lost world. What can a shattered wreck in the South China Sea reveal about the technical brilliance of the Japanese Navy?
The result was complete collapse of half of the ship's systems from a single blow.
What secret weapon sends this mighty warship down?
If you can't see it coming, how do you avoid it? Well, the answer is you don't.
And why does this sleepy Australian port become a second Pearl Harbor? December 1941. The Empire of Japan is on the march. It already holds parts of China. Now it targets the regions beyond, sparking conflict with America and her allies, including Great Britain. From the fortress of Singapore, the Royal Navy dominates the South China Seas. Can the ruins of a mighty battleship reveal just how badly the British misjudged the power of their new enemy? As the Japanese launch their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Winston Churchill worries that they might invade the Dutch East Indies and British Malaya, areas rich in the resources that Japan badly needs, especially oil. Seeing the imminent threat, the Royal Navy mobilizes a battle group of 6 powerful warships and call it Force Z. Its mission is to head northeast from Singapore on the lookout for Japanese invaders. Leading the squadron, is a brand new battleship, HMS Prince of Wales. Churchill believes that her mere presence will be enough to deter the enemy.
Prince of Wales was a state-of-the-art battleship, very heavily protected. The ship with its armor was pretty immune to attack.
The battleship was the supreme embodiment of a nation's sea power and majesty. If you saw a Prince of Wales coming over the horizon, you knew you were in big trouble.
Armed with 10 14-inch main guns, plus 16 secondary guns and anti-aircraft capability, the Prince of Wales is lethal to targets at sea, on land, and in the air. She's also well protected. Armor shields the deck, and an additional 15-inch thick belt surrounds her massive hull. Force Z is 50 miles east of British Malaya when it's spotted by Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. But by early afternoon the following day, the Prince of Wales is at the bottom of the South China Sea, and Britannia's rule over these waters is over. Decades later, diver Rod MacDonald is part of a military expedition to research what happened here.
My role in this expedition is basically to try and work out exactly why the wreck sank. When this vessel was built, it was a state-of-the-art battleship.
The location of the wreck is well known, but her condition has not been revealed in such detail before. Over 200 feet down, the mighty Prince of Wales, silent on the seafloor. There are areas of serious damage. Over weeks, the divers scour the wreck, gathering data. And as the waters roll back, light shines for the first time in almost 80 years on HMS Prince of Wales. It's mostly intact, but its starboard side is punctured by 3 massive holes. From their position below the waterline, they look like torpedo strikes. Elsewhere on the wreck, further details of her final battle. The smaller 5.25 gun turrets on the starboard side are all aimed downwards. As the British sailors fight to defend their ship, what are they shooting at? The answer may lie with another ship. The USS North Carolina, a battleship built to similar specifications. It survived its own deadly encounters with the Japanese. Naval historian Anthony Tully believes this battleship holds clues about the downfall of its British cousin.
Behind us are the North Carolina's secondary battery of 5-inch 38 caliber guns. The Prince of Wales had 8 5-inch mounts of similar size. These guns were trained low on the horizontal. They're not elevated like this, but rather like this.
Guns trained low couldn't hit distant ships. And they aren't for taking on submarines. Tully believes it can mean only one thing: air attack.
They're trying to track the planes. Because the Japanese aircraft were attacking at wave-top level, and they had to lower them to this level to even have a chance of hitting them.
5.2-inch guns are formidable against attacking aircraft, but the armor-belted hull is the Prince of Wales' ultimate defense, impervious to most gunfire and torpedoes.
If any ship would be able to shrug off an air attack, it was Prince of Wales.
No battleship had been sunk in action in the open sea. The big guns of battleship were the only things that could take out another battleship.
Despite all this protection, somehow the Japanese managed to break through. The drained wreck exposes more clues. The holes reveal whatever hit this hull created massive damage. Much bigger than damage caused by a typical torpedo of the day. It points to one thing: a new Japanese wonder weapon. The Type 91 torpedo.
The standard torpedo can break the surface and run in an erratic direction that you don't intend it to go. But the Japanese have pretty much worked the bugs out of their torpedoes.
The Japanese military used the 91 with devastating effect for the first time just days earlier at Pearl Harbor.
It came as a nasty surprise to the Allies. The warhead was quite powerful compared to other contemporary torpedoes. It could be released at a higher altitude, at a longer distance from the target, at higher speed. These innovations made it a revolutionary version of an aerial torpedo.
The Type 91 torpedo is indeed revolutionary. At its nose is a warhead carrying a payload of 450 pounds of explosive. Wooden stabilizers on its tail fins guide it into the water. On entering, the fins snap off. Then, an internal depth meter keeps the missile from rolling off target and at a steady 20 feet below the surface. But if the torpedo was at this depth, it should have hit the ship right in the armor belt.
If any of these torpedoes had hit the armor belt, Prince of Wales would have survived unscathed.
But the damage on the wreck is way below the armor, on the ship's soft underbelly. How did the Japanese 91s strike so low? The battleship HMS Prince of Wales is sunk while patrolling the South China Sea. Japanese aerial torpedoes, designed to strike at precisely 20 feet below the waterline, have pierced the battleship. But her hull is supposed to be impenetrable. Looking at what remains of the battered wreck, the hull damage shows torpedoes strike 3 times on the starboard side. Outside the protective armor belt and below the normal operating depth of the Type 91. And there's another hole on the port side, close to the stern. Can this torpedo strike explain the ship's fate? The damage at the stern attracts the attention of naval historian Anthony Tully. He's on board the USS North Carolina, a ship with similar design features to the Prince of Wales.
This is the propeller shaft we're seeing. If you were standing right here, it'd be spinning like crazy. Because of the torpedo hit, you had a bent shaft rotating out of alignment.
The bent shaft causes a dangerous chain reaction. A ship's hull is divided into partitions known as bulkheads. These add strength and can be sealed off to contain water if flooding occurs. They are what allow a warship to take a hit but stay afloat. Running through these bulkheads are the ship's 4 propeller shafts. A damaged but still rotating shaft would rupture the bulkhead seals all along its length. This would allow water to flood the engine room, deep in the center of the ship.
This entire space, this entire vast claustrophobic space, would be filled with water.
It doesn't take much water inside a ship to alter the trim of the ship.
If flooding makes the ship list to one side, it would raise the armor belt out of the water, exposing the ship's vulnerable hull to further torpedo strikes.
If the ship had been on an even keel, that torpedo would have hit the armor belt, which would have dealt with it quite easily.
Using all the evidence, we can now recreate what likely happened. It's late morning. Force Z are spotted by enemy aircraft and turned back, heading to Singapore. But the hunter becomes the hunted. Japanese bombers arriving from nearby bases spot the British fleet. The Prince of Wales lowers her anti-aircraft guns and opens fire on the enemy. A bomber, now at wave-top level on her attack run, launches her deadly Type 91 torpedo. It strikes the Prince of Wales, right by the port propeller.
It is impossible to protect the propellers and steering gear of a battleship.
The flooding ship starts to list. The armored section rises up, bringing the unprotected hull into the firing line of the torpedo.
It's a sitting duck.
3 more torpedoes strike the Prince of Wales on the starboard side, beneath the armor plating. A state-of-the-art battleship is now brought down by a handful of torpedoes.
In about 100 minutes, less than 2 hours, one of the most modern battleships in the world had been sunk by torpedo bombers.
Force Z loses the Prince of Wales and one other warship in the battle group, HMS Repulse. 840 British sailors are dead, and naval warfare has been changed forever.
No battleship had been sunk by air attack at sea. This is a major landmark in naval history.
This catastrophic defeat marks the beginning of the end for the British Empire in the East. And the Japanese have only just begun. What can we learn of the scale of Japan's ambition from a vessel lost over 3,000 miles from Japan itself? Expedition diver Mac McCarthy has been investigating wrecks in the Pacific Ocean for decades. War records reveal a Japanese submarine, I-124, was sunk off the coast of Australia in January 1942, and he wants to find it. His mission takes him to waters north of Australia, to an area declared a war grave and off limits to diving since 1976.
I had a personal desire to see it because it had so much mystery around it.
In 1988, Mac and his team gained permission to explore the wreckage.
The problem was that the position fixing in those early days wasn't very good, so it was very difficult to locate the wreck.
The crew deploys a side-scan sonar.
You clearly start to see this pointy shape, which is the bow. And of course, it's a glorious moment.
Oh, whackety deck. Look at this. See the conning tower?
Mac's team has pinpointed what looks like their sunken sub. Next, they lower an ROV.
There we all were around the screen. And then down it goes, and we're watching the compass, and we're watching what's in front. And then there comes the submarine.
The submarine has suffered damage. But is this the sub he's looking for? To find out, we're now able to drain the waters of the Timor Sea. The submarine appears. A 5.5-inch deck gun is clearly visible. The conning tower shows signs of damage from enemy attack. It must have been hit hard and repeatedly. And there's more. Markings visible on the tower. Japanese submarine I-124. Submarines are the ultimate maritime stealth weapon. Nearly undetectable when submerged. But something must have found this one. Australian naval historian Tom Lewis is trying to work out what the submarine was doing here. He's found blueprints that match the sunken sub's features.
If you look at this, you've got torpedo tubes, ballast tanks, you've got diesel engines, you've got electric batteries, you've got periscopes. You sort of say, okay, German U-boat from World War I. So Japan took the plans of one of the German U-boats and they copied it.
But this isn't a straight copy of a German sub. The Japanese take the design and develop it further to give the submarine a new role.
This is a mine-laying submarine. It's designed in a different way from other submarines of World War I and II. The mines are bigger than the average sort of mine. You make a big mine and you dispense it and it's got more firepower, it's got more punch.
The I-124 is one of 4 underwater mine layers in the Imperial Japanese Navy. 280 feet long, it carries a crew of over 75 men. It's armed with torpedoes and a deck gun, and it carries 42 powerful sea mines.
This book here is the Wreck Inspection Journal, which we have to keep.
So what was this mine layer doing here? Mac McCarthy finds a map detailing the war movements of all 4 Japanese mine layers.
These are Japanese records, and they show the movements of the Japanese submarines in the North Australian coast and their proximity to the coast.
The Japanese subs are targeting this critical supply route between Northern Australia and the Dutch East Indies. A mine layer should be undetectable. So how did it somehow make itself a target? Off the coast of Northern Australia, diver Mac McCarthy has found a Japanese World War II submarine. A closer look at the drained wreck reveals something unusual. Hatches in the hull have been blown open. Elsewhere on the seabed, something curious. Objects that look like oil barrels. These are submarine killers. Depth charges. Depth charges are deployed when a submarine is spotted. As a charge sinks to a pre-selected depth, it detonates. The shockwave can send a sub down. This sub must have been spotted, then hit hard. But how did the enemy know where I-124 was? January 19th, 1942. The submarine sends a routine message that is picked up by Allied intelligence. The following day, a torpedo attack on a U.S. ship alerts them to Japanese submarine activity. The Australian sub-killer, De Lorraine, armed to the teeth with depth charges, heads off to search for it. While Japanese and German subs are similar, their tactics are very different. The Germans target merchant shipping, while Japanese subs shadow and attack Allied task forces.
The Japanese strategy in World War II, how they use their submarines, is flawed. They attack warships. It's a sort of odd concept.
When the De La Reine spots a torpedo fired at it, it's the clue the crew needs. For once, the Japanese Navy is too ambitious for its own good. It allows the De La Reine to pinpoint the sub, then attack. Now, using evidence from historical records and our drained shipwreck, we can illustrate I-124's final hours. The I-124 is laying mines in the Allied shipping lane. Allied intelligence alerts HMAS De La Reine to the presence of a sub. She fails to find it. The I-124 spots the Australian warship first and attacks. A torpedo narrowly misses, and the De La Reine is alerted to the sub's position.
Unfortunately, they took on a modern warship specifically designed to kill submarines.
The minesweeper immediately charges the sub.
Where do you go? Once they've got a lock on you and they can see where it's come from, they know where you are. It's a suicidal position.
I-124 is pummeled by round after round of depth charges. Seconds later, the hatches blow and she plunges to the depths. The first Japanese submarine to be sunk by the Australian Navy in World War II. There are no survivors. Despite their advanced technology, the Japanese strategy of using subs for preemptive attacks cost them dearly here. But the wreck of I-124 is evidence that the Japanese do quickly bring the war to northern Australia. They will be back, and in shocking force. Maritime archaeologists David Steinberg and Silvano Young are leading an expedition dive in Darwin Harbour, northern Australia. They've come to investigate the largest ever attack on Australian soil. The only warning is the drone of an air armada. Nearly 200 Japanese planes descend on Darwin, strafing the harbor. Next, they target the town itself. 9 naval vessels are sunk, and hundreds are dead and wounded.
It's a massive attack and was devastating and overwhelming and lived in people's memories. Those that experienced it will never forget it. I think Darwin is Australia's Pearl Harbor.
David and Silvano are searching for evidence to understand just why the raid was so successful and so deadly.
There it is.
One of the main things we're going to be looking for is any damage that's been done from the attack on the 9th of February 1942.
Beam down. Roger, left surface 0918. On the wreck. Yeah, Roger, just have a swim round and just work out where you are. This looks like a structure here.
But the dive can only reveal so much. Using data from David and Silvano's survey, we can lay the floor of Darwin Harbour bare. to reveal not a ship, but a plane. Camouflaged paintwork suggests it's military, not civilian. Features on the plane help David identify it. It's a Catalina. The Catalina is an Allied flying boat. It was used for vital intelligence gathering and surveillance.
The Catalinas were essential for the Allied war effort because the only way you were going to find the enemy at sea was with your own eyes.
Here you've got some torn sheeting. I mean, oh, look at that. Does that look burnt to you? Certainly does.
Definitely burnt.
There's clear evidence of fire.
That's most definitely burn damage from the fire that caused the loss of the aircraft.
So what caused this fire and ultimately sent this Catalina down?
Can you see this clearly? We've got more examples of damage.
So you got machine gun damage.
Returning to the drained wreckage, there's more evidence. More signs of gunfire. Under the pilot's window, something else. Larger holes. Telltale signs.
Yeah, that looks like 20mm cannon damage there.
Which points to one particular fighter plane. A brilliantly designed killer that is a vital cog in Japan's military machine. The Zero.
Oh, it's very exciting, yeah. It was really a process of elimination. There were Zeros that came down strafing on them.
The Mitsubishi A6M, or Zero, is a fighter plane capable of launching from aircraft carriers. It carries a pair of 1/3-inch machine guns and a 3/4-inch cannon in each wing. It has an unparalleled range of over 1,500 miles.
The Zero is an iconic Japanese fighter. It is to the Japanese what the Spitfire is to the British.
Japan attacks Darwin with her best, and fresh evidence beneath the waters of the harbor reveals a secret tactic that almost guarantees success. David Steinberg and Silvano Young have found one plane in Darwin Harbor. Now, they extend their search. And discover two more downed Catalinas. Mapping the position of all three planes reveals they lie in a line. They couldn't have all crashed this way. The wrecked flying boats must have been moored at the time of the attack. Evidence on the drained Catalina sheds light on Japanese tactics that February morning. The position of the damage, all on one side, is revealing. The bullet holes all lie on its south side, suggesting the direction of the attack comes not from the sea, but from inland. An approach from the south, over the Australian mainland, would surprise the Allies. And Tom Lewis thinks the Japanese tactic of attacking in the morning gave them another advantage.
There's a number of reasons for attacking from the south. The first is you're attacking out of the sun. You've still got the sun behind you, which is good because it blinds your defenders. So it gives you that element of surprise.
At the time of the attack, Darwin is a small town of 2,000 civilians. But Darwin's size belies its importance. Its location isn't just the perfect place for launching surveillance aircraft like the Catalinas, as David and Silvano discover as they continue to scour the seabed. They find another wreck, a large ship. Much of it is gone, salvaged in the decades since it sank. But enough remains to reveal what it was: a cargo ship.
We can see there is trucks and motorbikes and ammunition, and also all recorded on this site is gas masks and mortars, military equipment.
And the importance of Darwin becomes clear. It's a crucial link in the Allies' supply chain, a base for vessels, and the hub for shipping ammunition and other vital supplies. Now, it's possible to understand exactly what happened in Darwin Harbor. "188 planes are launched from 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, nearly 200 miles to the north. But rather than heading directly to Darwin, the planes fly east, circling around the town. They want to attack Darwin Harbor from the south.
You would have seen the aircraft coming towards you this way, crossing the beach down there.
The Australians are unprepared. The town is poorly defended for an attack from the air. The Catalinas are sitting ducks as the Zeros circle round to attack, protected by the full glare of the sun. The pilots swoop down, unleashing the full force of their weapons, machine gunning the moored planes. A second wave of planes arrives, high-altitude bombers.
The place was in absolute pandemonium.
The fighters and bombers destroy 30 military aircraft and 9 ships anchored in the harbor.
Behind is left chaos, ships on fire, ships sinking, people in the water who are dead.
Darwin remained ineffective as a harbor that could support the war.
The Japanese have used advanced technology and smart tactics against an unsuspecting and unprepared enemy. The Allied supply chain into the Pacific is crippled. And still, the shockwave spreads. In Washington, D.C. and London, Allied leaders are astonished at the scale and speed of Japan's victories. Just days before the Darwin bombing, the Japanese also capture the famous British stronghold of Singapore. Now Japan has its eye on Java in the Dutch East Indies, today known as Indonesia. The Imperial Navy mobilizes a landing fleet to seize its precious oil fields. The Allies scramble to stop them, pulling together a force that includes one of Australia's most famous warships, HMAS Perth. At 550 feet long, the light cruiser HMAS Perth is almost twice the length of the Statue of Liberty. Achieving 32 knots, she's built for speed. Armed with almost 40 guns, the Perth is a fearsome opponent. But the Allied fleet she's sailing in is unprepared for what's to come.
There was an ad hoc force of cruisers and destroyers from 4 different countries: Australia, Britain, the United States, and the Netherlands. So you have this almost ragtag and bobtail force of ships against the very highly trained and motivated Japanese Navy.
The two fleets meet in the Battle of the Java Sea, and the Allies don't stand a chance. They lose 5 vessels, along with 2,300 lives.
There was no common doctrine, no common signaling system. The whole thing degenerated into complete chaos.
2 Allied cruisers escape, seeking refuge on the southern coast of Java. An American heavy cruiser, USS Houston, and HMAS Perth.
They had been told that there were no Japanese forces in the vicinity, so therefore they could have a safe passage.
But 48 hours after escaping the Japanese in the Java Sea, the Perth disappears. An expedition to unravel the fate of the Allied warships, including the Perth, is led by veteran wreck hunter Vidar Skogli. Her last known position is in the Sunda Strait, a narrow passage of water between the islands of Java and Sumatra. The team surveys the area, looking for wrecks. Eventually, the sonar detects something promising.
The biggest thrill of all is to find a new wreck. You never know what you're going to find down there.
The team dives. They encounter a massive wreck. And as the waters roll back, we can see for the first time a huge vessel lying on her port side, with 4 large gun turrets visible and several gaping holes in the hull. It's definitely the Perth. The guns on one of the turrets are pointing straight down into the sand. And the sighting ports on the 2 half turrets are both open. These guns were operational and firing to the end. She did not go down without a fight. A dive team led by Vidar Skogli is investigating the wreck of HMAS Perth. The exposed starboard side of the Perth hull shows several gaping holes. And underneath, they find something else.
It had some very serious torpedo damage right behind the bow, where you could actually swim through the hole from one side to the other.
Using the data, we can look beneath the wreck to reveal something impossible to see from diving alone. 2 bigger holes on the opposite port side. The Perth was under attack from both directions. And one attacker hit the ship with something unusually powerful. A typical torpedo wouldn't cause such massive damage. Wartime records suggest one possible cause was something that wreaked havoc in the Java Sea days before. A Japanese wonder weapon, the Long Lance torpedo.
The Long Lance was by far the most effective torpedo in the world, and the Western navies had virtually no idea of its existence.
Reaching faster speeds than anything else afloat at the time, the Long Lance has a huge warhead, packing around twice the payload of an average torpedo. It has an astonishing range of 23 miles. Inside, it uses a revolutionary system of propulsion, which leaves no trail of bubbles.
The standard surface torpedo ran on compressed air, which means that you get bubbles. It leaves a wake in the water, which you can see from quite a distance. You can see it coming. If you can't see the torpedo coming, how do you avoid it? Well, the answer is you don't. You can't.
Its ability to target ships at distances unheard of means the Japanese can attack the Allies while keeping their own ships out of range. Tragically for the Perth, she escapes one Japanese fleet, then sails unwittingly into the path of a second.
What they didn't realize was that they were running into a major Japanese invasion force.
Piecing together the evidence, a picture emerges of the final hours of HMAS Perth and her crew. In the Java Sea, the Allies take on the Japanese. Over the course of the battle, Allied ships are hit hard. The Perth escapes. Told that the Sunda Strait is safe, the captain heads for this narrow stretch of water off the Java coast. But she's spotted by a Japanese destroyer. Minutes later, 3 entire destroyer divisions close in. Salvos of torpedoes come from all sides. The Japanese go in for the kill.
Now they could concentrate a superior force of destroyers.
Two torpedoes hit the port side. Massive explosions, suggesting long lances.
It was very difficult to counter a long lance because you couldn't see it coming.
After over an hour of desperate fighting, the Perth goes down, along with 375 sailors. Another emphatic victory for the Japanese Navy. The following day, Japanese landing fleets begin their invasion of Java Island. Just one day after originally planned.
With the delay of the invasion of Java by a mere 24 hours and the heavy losses suffered, this must go down as one of the greatest disasters in naval history.
Thousands of Allied lives were lost across the region in just 3 days. But today, surveys reveal that little remains of the Perth or many other ships sunk by the Japanese. These and other vessels face another more recent enemy. Salvagers, with the wrecks being illegally ripped apart for their metal.
The grab itself would go down on top of the wreck and it would stab into it. They would close up and then just tear chunks of metal off. So piece by piece, they would rip it up.
There's just no wreck at all, as if it's just been lifted.
What remains of these wrecks is a continuing reminder of the first shocking months of the Pacific War and the price of Allied overconfidence.
There was a tendency at this time to underestimate the Japanese.
The Japanese actively encouraged that kind of misperception on the part of the Western countries because they didn't want them to know how advanced they really were.
Less than 3 months after Pearl Harbor, the Empire of Japan is at the apex of its power. With superior technology and strategy, it now controls the entire region and its oil. It will take the Allies 3 deadly years to defeat an enemy they so shockingly underestimated. World War I. A new stealth weapon brings terror to the oceans.
This is a dirty war.
Evidence of a naval revolution, lost for a century beneath the storm-ravaged seas of the British Isles. Imagine if we could empty the oceans, letting the water drain away to reveal the secrets of the seafloor. Now we can, using accurate data and astonishing technology to bring light once again to a lost world. Why do 3 Royal Navy warships simply disappear?
The British are shocked.
how does a single torpedo change the course of history?
For a ship of that size to disappear in less than 20 minutes was just incredible.
And how do the Allies strike back in a battle that changes naval warfare forever? Today's superpowers prize one weapon above all others. The submarine. The ultimate stealth weapon. Striking at will. Delivering its deadly payload from out of nowhere. But the rise of the submarine started a century ago. It's a story that begins with a mystery off the coast of Holland. The corpse of an enormous ship emerges. And not just one. 3 broken giants lie side by side. How did they get here? 1914. Britain and Germany go to war. Britannia has ruled the waves for centuries. Her fleet so massive, how can Germany ever hope to win? Just 7 weeks into the war, HMS Aboukir, Cressy, and Hogue scan the horizon near the Dutch coast. Their mission: seek and destroy any enemy that dares to threaten British vessels supplying the battlefields of France.
It was there as a screen against serious German surface attack on these vital cross-channel supplies.
The 3 ships are packed with cutting-edge technology. Among the first ever protected by super-hardened steel plate. A whole new class of warship. Armored cruisers.
These are powerful ships. They'll blow you out the water if they see you on the surface. They're armed with 12 6-inch guns, 2 9.2-inch guns each.
The morning of September 22nd is clear and calm. There's no enemy in sight. Yet the 3 cruisers vanish. Their last communication, a distress signal. In the weeks that follow, hundreds of bodies wash up along the Dutch coast. Britain's belief that her navy is invincible is rocked to the core. For a decade, Cloudy Bartolink has been investigating the fate of the lost patrol. Now, she's onto something.
So, we're 20 miles off the Dutch coast. Over there is England, and over there are the Netherlands. I tried to find the 3 cruisers and figure out what has happened to them.
She's on the last known coordinates of the 3 ships. "115 feet down, Cloudy and her dive buddy find themselves among piles of twisted wreckage. The wreck site is massive, stretching for hundreds of feet into the darkness. Cloudy's exploration reveals that there's more than one vessel here. And her lights pick out something else. Strewn all around, shells still in their casings. Never fired.
I saw a lot of ammunition. I see the boxes with small shells. It has to be a military ship. And on these coordinates, they're definitely Cressy, Hogue, or Aboukir.
A positive ID, but in the gloom, it's difficult to see how the ships met their end.
It's very hard to understand the shape of the ship below because you only see part of the ships. And you can't recognize like the bow or something. It's impossible.
High-tech sonar scans provide a solution, mapping the wrecks in perfect detail, allowing us to do something never possible before. Drain away the English Channel to see the lost patrol clearly for the first time in over 100 years. The warships bristle with guns, including these innovative side-mounted weapons called casement guns. On the smooth hull of Aboukir, there's no sign of battle damage. But near the stern, a gaping wound. On the other two wrecks, fatal blows also clearly visible. Hogue's hull is broken open. Cressy's interior completely exposed. Damage like this, far beneath the waterline, is hard evidence that a terrible new weapon is in play.
So what you see is where torpedoes went into the ships. And I think this is the moment that the naval warfare changed forever.
Torpedoes are self-propelled and deadly. Flying under the waves, they strike below the waterline.
The torpedo, as initially developed and tested through the 1860s and 1870s, is truly refined in World War I.
They are originally fired from ships. But on the day of the lost patrol, the horizon is empty. The source of the torpedoes must lurk unseen, unable to defeat the Royal Navy's massive battle fleets on the surface. The Germans are now deploying new technology under the waves. They call them Unterseeboote, U-boats. The British cruisers are completely unprepared.
What they weren't expecting was this covert underwater attack, which is carried out with great skill.
Unfired ammunition on the seabed shows that the cruisers don't put up much of a fight. By the time they spot torpedoes running, the battle is already over.
U-boats are a game changer.
The way the drained ships lie close together reveals that they were sitting ducks. As the first goes down, the other two race in to rescue survivors, giving U-boat number 9 the perfect opportunity to pick them off with ease. They still lie where they fell, side by side.
The sinking of the three cruisers, Aboukir, Hogue, and Cressy, demonstrated the power of the submarine perhaps more than anything else.
The Dutch authorities bury the British dead with military honors.
In the Netherlands, it was big news. It was in all newspapers, because in 1.5 hours, almost 1,500 men died. And 13 of them were teenage boys, so it was a very big story. And they were buried here honorably. There were soldiers along the roads. They paid a lot of attention to it.
U-boats are so effective because German engineers have overcome some massive technical challenges. And how they manage this can still be seen because, remarkably, the very first U-boat survived.
This is U-1, Germany's first submarine, over 100 years old. And you could make some 5 or 6 hours submerged with the electric engine at slow speed, 5-6 knots.
Electric engines power the 139-foot-long vessel when underwater. Its batteries are recharged by 2 gasoline engines, which run the U-boat on the surface.
We have 2 different pairs of engine, 2 gasoline and 2 electric motors. So it's like a modern car, a hybrid system.
U-1 can dive to 100 feet and travel submerged for 50 miles. But for their crew, U-boats are unforgiving places. There's deafening engine noise, exposed electrical circuits, and if seawater gets into the batteries, deadly chlorine gas will quickly spread.
If you're serving in submarines, you've got a higher chance of dying than you have if you're on the Western Front.
U-boats may be dangerous for their crews, but they're lethal to their enemies. And the Germans have boats almost 3 times bigger than U-1 on the drawing board. During 1915, Germany expands its fleet to over 50. And that's just the start.
The climax was reached with the number of 125 available submarines, means around 30, 40 submarines were at sea daily.
And this expanding U-boat force doesn't just have military targets in its sights.
There were elements in the German Navy who quite deliberately wanted to achieve what you might call a form of maritime terrorism.
The killer U-boats target a world-famous ship in an attack that shocks the world. The U-boat menace is growing. By 1915, no Allied ship is safe. Off Ireland's southern coast, Owen McGarry investigates what happens when the German Navy dramatically escalates its campaign.
It's under the water. You can look around. You don't know where it is. You don't know where it's going to attack from. How do you attack back?
U-boats entering service in the second year of the war could dive almost twice as deep as U-1 and run submerged for 80 miles. Increased range means they can now strike deep into the Atlantic. And soon the German Navy is making the most of its killer technology. Beneath this buoy lies the wreck of one of the most iconic ships in history, and its shocking secret. Owen is one of a select few experienced enough to make the dive. It's so deep, he must breathe a special mix of gases to stay alive.
It's like the Everest of diving. It's just within the realms of safety and the limitations of your qualifications.
He heads down over 300 feet into the darkness. This twisted wreckage is all that remains of one of the most luxurious passenger liners ever built. But for over a century, the power of the sea has taken its toll.
On a huge wreck, like 798 foot long, it still lies as a huge hulk on the sea floor. It's festooned with fishing nets, discarded fishing nets, tangled fishing nets. It's a dangerous dive.
It also hides clues to an atrocity so shocking, it changes the course of the war. This is the wreck of RMS Lusitania. On May 1st, 1915, Lusitania leaves New York for Britain. Like her ill-fated rival, Titanic, this massive liner has been engineered to be unsinkable. On board, nearly 2,000 souls.
It was like a floating five-star hotel in one end of it. And then for the third-class passengers, it was still a luxurious way and fast way of crossing the Atlantic.
6 days later, Lusitania is just 12 miles from the Irish coast. Her captain has been warned that U-boats are in the area, but Lusitania can surely outrun any threat.
The Lusitania was doing 24 knots when she was cruising. And if you look out the stern of the Lusitania, you could put 60 water skiers across in the water, and she could pull water skiers, she went that fast.
So why does this superliner, built to be invincible, never arrive? 300 feet down, clues are hard to spot. But feeding precise 3D scanning data into powerful animation software means we can now reveal the wreck of one of the most famous ships that ever sailed. Lusitania slowly emerges back into the light. 32,000 tons of scarred and twisted metal. She lies tilted on her starboard side, part sunken into the seabed. Can this be linked to how she sank? Now, seeing under the seafloor itself, it's possible to reveal something never seen before. Evidence of a fatal blow. Here, under the waterline, the unmistakable hallmark of a torpedo strike. U-20 has been ordered to stalk these waters, not only hunting warships, liners too. The U-boat unleashes a single torpedo, like an assassin's bullet.
If you could imagine being on the deck of the Lusitania, being 6-7 stories up and looking over, and you see this thing coming at you and you know it's going to hit you, and you know exactly what it is. That must be daunting.
Lusitania is built to take on huge amounts of water, yet still stay afloat. How could a single shot send a ship this big to the bottom? The drained wreck reveals the hull is snapped clean in half, and the tip of the bow severely damaged. Evidence the liner hits the seafloor with tremendous force. Now, at last, we can reconstruct Lusitania's final moments. The torpedo blows open a hole. Lusitania is traveling so fast that her momentum forces tons of water in. She plunges into the Atlantic, taking nearly 1,200 men, women, and children with her.
She's almost driving herself underneath the water. And even if the props were stopped, she still was 32,000 tons, still being driven forward.
There's hardly any time to launch lifeboats.
She was gone in 20 minutes, which must have been just terrifying for the people on board.
Lusitania's speed hasn't saved her. It's killed her. She hits the seabed so fast that her huge hull snaps in two. Many hundreds of bodies wash ashore nearby, buried in mass graves in Ireland, as the whole world reels in shock.
The Germans were seen as murderers. They were seen as villains.
U-boats are now a terror weapon. But it's a risky strategy. The loss of American civilians on Lusitania and further U-boat attacks on American shipping pushes the U.S. towards joining the war. The German Navy knows that the clock is ticking.
The Germans know that they have a short window in which they can try to win the war. If they can get enough subs out there, if they can have advances on the battlefield, then they have a chance.
The killer U-boats launch a new campaign to crush their enemy outright. Waged here, just off the coast of Britain. But the battle is about to get a lot tougher for everyone. Lurking beneath the surface, unseen, unchallenged, the U-boat seems invincible.
To counter the threat of the German U-boats, the Royal Navy in particular didn't have much that they could throw at it.
U-boats can hide themselves within sight of any British port. The enemy is at the gates. After sinking Lusitania, the U-boat fleet doubles to over 100 vessels. They're planning to land a decisive blow.
We will sink enough ships to stop Britain importing, and this will defeat the British, who are the linchpin of the Allies, before the Americans, who might well declare war, can bring their power to bear.
Britain's ports are the final destination for a vast maritime supply chain. Thousands of merchant ships bring vital food, munitions, and supplies from the British Empire and the USA.
The need to support the war in Europe sees a massive shipment of men and materiel across the Atlantic, as well as the movement of ships in and around the British Isles. The Germans know this, and the submarines are sent out to take those ships out, with deadly effect.
If the German U-boats can cut the flow of supply ships, they can starve Britain into submission, and they'll stop at nothing to do it.
It's a total war. Civilians are targets. Merchant seamen are targets. This is what total war is. It's not a war between sailors and soldiers. It's a war in which everybody is involved, and everybody will be sacrificed.
This war rages most fiercely here in the Irish Sea, just outside the important port of Liverpool. In these seas, Bangor University's survey vessel, Prince Madog, is on a mission.
There she is.
Marine archaeologist Inez McCartney has joined forces with oceanographer Mike Roberts. Using the latest scanners, their ambitious plan is to locate every victim of this battle and discover what happens when the U-boats try to starve Britain into submission.
In World War I, this stretch of water was a very, very dangerous place to be.
Every merchant ship runs the gauntlet to make it through this corridor of death.
It must have been terrifying knowing what could happen at any moment.
And Prince Madog's survey is uncovering the massive scale of the killing.
Immediately beneath us are the remnants of a protracted battle, a battlefield effectively, which contains the remains of many, many hundreds of shipwrecks.
The sonar scans reveal the scattered bodies of the U-boat's victims. They prey on any type of vessel. Thousands perish. Innes and Mike study one wreck closely. A ship heavily laden with cargo for the war effort.
We know from the position of where it is, combined with the length and other details that we can see, that this is the wreck of SS Apapa.
4 a.m., November 28th, 1917. SS Apapa is almost at the end of her journey from West Africa. As well as cargo, she's carrying 119 passengers, including many women and children. Soon, they'll be docking safely at Liverpool. They hope.
It's coming into the danger zone where the U-boats are waiting.
US 96 is in the perfect position.
The U-boat had maneuvered round and was between the land and the ship, undetectable against the background. Fires a torpedo which struck the Apapa in the stern. And it immediately began to sink. The captain on the Apapa ordered the women and children to be put into the lifeboats. So the lifeboats are swung out and are put down on the rail.
Though Apapa is already sinking, U-96 commander Heinrich Jess isn't finished with her yet.
At this point, U-96 has fired its second torpedo, what the commander referred to as the killing shot. And it was being hit the second time while everybody was evacuating. It caused 77 people to die.
The dead civilians on board Apapa make this one of the most infamous U-boat attacks ever. But it's just one of many, under orders to sink a monthly quota of 600,000 tons of shipping. U-boat attacks are relentless.
In fact, at 1 month, April 1917, they get to 800,000 tons. It's quite massive. They're doing better than they expected.
National survival is on the line. How can the British fight back?
Not only do German submarines improve and change during the First World War, but also the means by which to find them and sink them also begin to change.
Prince Madog has found dozens of wrecks. Now she picks up a new signal from the seafloor, unlike any seen so far. Is this evidence of an underwater counteroffensive?
Skinny and tube-like with a central high point. This is a classic submarine wreck.
Among the wrecks surveyed in the killing zone, this is the only U-boat. So, if U-boats are so dominant here in 1917, what is it doing on the seabed? Prince Madog's detailed scan makes it possible to drain back the waters and investigate. It's an amazingly well-preserved U-boat, frozen in time. And this fearsome killer's 200-foot-long body looks completely undamaged. Accurate measurements from the high-res scan means Innes can identify exactly which U-boat this is.
The distance from the bow to the conning tower to the stern, and all of that matches up exactly correctly for U-87.
It's an incredible discovery. U-87 is one of a whole new class of long-range ocean-going hunter-killers. It's faster than previous U-boats and carries twice as many torpedoes. A deadly threat.
U-87 was the best type of submarine the Germans were capable of making in 1916 to 1917.
What could its mysterious fate tell us of the desperate struggle to stop the killer U-boats? The wreck of U-87 sits on the seabed, apparently intact. But over 500 feet across the drained ocean floor, another, much smaller piece of wreckage comes to light. It appears to be the very tip of U-87's stern. What's it doing here? Aboard survey vessel Prince Madog, Inez McCartney reviews records of U-87, detailing her mission, and learns more about the day she is destroyed.
Christmas Day 1917, U-87 encounters a small convoy and torpedoes a steamship. The U-boat's periscope is subsequently spotted.
Royal Navy patrol boat P-56 has U-87 in its sights.
The chances of any of these patrol boats ever seeing a submarine was remote, and when they did, everything gets used to take them out.
And she's carrying a new kind of anti-submarine weapon, an underwater bomb called a depth charge.
A depth charge is an explosive that is set once launched or rolled off the side or the back of a ship to detonate at a set depth.
The British captain gets as close to the last sighting of U-87 as he can and fires a volley of depth charges. But is this what sinks the U-boat? Can this small fragment give us an answer? Some force has left it 500 feet away from the U-boat. But the edges of the wound look clean, not jagged. Could a depth charge do this?
Can you confirm the range is clear for firing? Over.
Confirm the range is clear.
At a remote defense testing facility in Scotland, demolition experts are trying to understand what effect an underwater blast can have on a U-boat. Sensitive equipment measures the force a depth charge unleashes outside and inside the hull.
60 seconds.
I wouldn't want to be in a submarine when that happens to it, because it's a very violent event.
Five, four, three, two, one.
The blast creates a pulsing shockwave. But it does not crack open the hull. However, the test reveals that depth charges can damage subs in other ways.
The direct shock wave excites the submarine, shakes it, vibrates it, until equipment fails.
If this array of fragile pipes, valves, and hatches breaks, that threatens the U-boat's survival and exposes its biggest weakness.
By setting a depth charge off underwater, the blast is intended to rupture the seams, to break systems, to rattle a crew, to concuss them.
Depth charges had the immediate effect of driving the U-boat to the surface.
On the surface, there's nowhere to hide. P-56 seizes the moment.
A good way of sinking submarines was just to ram them. they were vulnerable to this. They could be cut in half or have chunks taken out of them by a ship ramming them. This would sometimes perhaps damage the ship, but on the other hand, on balance, it was better to sink the submarine. And ramming is very important.
Risking sinking itself, the patrol boat heads on a collision course with U-87. The drained wreck bears the scars of this incredible clash. The impact cleanly slices off the rear end, leaving the fragment intact. It sinks to the bottom, followed quickly by the crippled U-boat.
As the submarine was sinking, the patrol boat that had rammed it could see the Germans inside the submarine, so we know it was opened right up.
The Germans have been wreaking havoc in the Irish Sea for months. But now, U-87's crew meets its own terrible fate.
Submarines were known to their crews sometimes as steel coffins. I think it's an apt analogy because when we find one of these sitting on the bottom, particularly one lost in combat, you realize that the crew is still inside.
The wreck of U-87 reveals that new technology, plus some luck and courage, could defeat a U-boat. And by the end of 1970, the Royal Navy has a new force dedicated to the fight.
The Anti-submarine division is charged with looking at every single means of technology, every single means of strategy available to it to combat this threat. And it develops a whole raft of different ways of dealing with it.
The counterattack means taking the war to the U-boats both above and below the waves.
They also developed the undersea mine as a more effective weapon and ultimately build a fortress wall, a barrage, as they call it, of mines to keep the Germans from approaching.
Around British coasts, huge forests of deadly floating bombs now protect shipping. These massive minefields sink U-boats and deter attacks. By the middle of 1918, the kill rate drops off from its peak at 800,000 tons per month to under 400,000 tons. But that's still a lot of sunken ships.
For all of the work being done to counter the German U-boats, they reigned supreme.
Conventional weapons are still not landing a decisive blow. The British must use a secret stealth weapon of their own. The English Channel is where the battle to defeat the U-boats reaches its climax. By 1918, its entrance blocked by a huge minefield. But off Plymouth, sonar scans reveal the outline of a wreck. It's similar to a Papa, a cargo ship. Does this mean that despite all Allied countermeasures, U-boats still threaten in these waters? Historical wreck researcher Steve Mortimer is heading out to take a closer look. For over 4 years, he's been searching for a lost legend. And this wreck is exactly what he's looking for.
Today we're looking to dive a shipwreck that was sunk in 1918 after a battle with a German U-boat. We've been looking for her for a number of years, but today we've got a really hard target. She's lying in 65 meters, we think, something like that. All we can do is go down, see what we find, and see if we can identify her.
Among the thousands of defenseless cargo ships sunk by U-boats in these deadly waters, Steve's target is special. The shape and size of the hull, proof that this was built as a cargo ship. And the mangled wreckage shows that it met a violent end. But the murky conditions obscure further secrets. Only draining away the English Channel can fully uncover the wreck and reveal the extraordinary truth. The hull is twisted and bent, the bow torn open, classic torpedo damage. But there's a totally unexpected discovery too. Naval guns, military hardware on a cargo ship. For Steve Mortimer, it's the evidence he's dreamed of.
Fantastic, that must be it, that must be it. The engine's on the stern of the ship, there's 2 big guns on the stern. It can't be anything else, that must be HMS Stockforce.
Stockforce is a legendary British secret weapon, codenamed a Q ship.
The Q ship is a warship disguised as a merchant vessel.
It's a ship that is trying to pretend to be something it isn't, and in this particular case to look innocent, when it is in fact far from innocent.
She may look like a harmless cargo ship, but Stockforce is heavily armed. 4-inch naval guns, like those on a cruiser or destroyer, sit on platforms that can be folded away and hidden below deck.
It's one type of stealth against another type of stealth.
Under a directive from Admiralty Chief Winston Churchill, the Royal Navy has deployed Q ships since the submarine menace first began.
It's thought to have been at least 200 ships, and they vary from the very smallest little fishing vessels, even single-mast sailing ships, right through to large merchant ships.
The sailors on board are not merchant seamen. They're fighting men, practiced in the art of deception. July 30th, 1918. As Stockforce sails along the English Channel, her job is not to transport cargo, but to lure a U-boat to attack. She spots a periscope. The trap can be laid. What happens next makes Stockforce and her crew famous. Their story immortalized in a silent movie. With great skill, U-80 has crept through a minefield and strikes first.
Most of the bridge is destroyed. Some members of the crew are trapped.
Stockforce starts to sink. The crew rushes to abandon ship. But it's all part of the trick.
They were even trained how to tip the lifeboat over while they were dropping it. So just to make the whole thing look very amateurish. The crew would then be off and the U-boat would then move into close quarters to finish off the ship.
U-80 takes the bait, surfacing to inspect its handiwork. Stockforce's captain, Harold Oughton, holds his nerve.
Oughton waits until the U-boat is in the optimum position to attack it, and then shouts, "Let's go," ordering his crew to fight back with everything they've got.
In would come the submarine, down would come the covers over the guns, and battle would commence.
It would be a hellfire of shells pouring into it.
You have to be able to hold your nerve even if your ship is sinking, and open fire and continue firing on a platform that is going glug, glug, glug into the ocean.
The U-boat is hit. The captain of Stockforce escapes only moments before his ship goes down. Commander Harold Oughton wins the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest honor for valor. At last, the Allies are neutralizing the U-boat threat, and cargo ships now reach Britain in well-protected convoys. There are simply not enough U-boats left to stop the flow of supplies.
If the Germans had been able to keep producing more submarines, they might very well have won the war.
When the exhausted Germans finally surrender in November 1918, they are forced to hand over their U-boats.
Before 1914, there isn't a great deal of understanding about what the submarine can really do. But by 1918, everybody knows it's a lethal weapon.
No one knows this better than the man bent on resurrecting German naval power in the 1930s.
The Nazis, well aware of the success of the U-boats in World War I, adopt that technology and adopt those strategies yet again.
In the Second World War, the Nazis launch over 1,100 new and improved U-boats. And once again, they devastate Allied shipping. Crewed by brave and remorseless men, the killer U-boats revolutionized naval warfare. The ancestors of the super subs that silently and secretly dominate the oceans today.